On a gathering storm comes a tall, handsome man in a dusty black coat and... Where the fuck is Red Right Hand?
Yeah, every movie but Scream 4? Copyright reasons? No Red Right Hand. How can this be?
No Red Right
Hand. It's not Scream without Red Right Hand. The seminal song cemented as the anthem of Scream is not in Scream 4? How do I shake my ass if there's no Red Right Hand?
And how are you? Hi, welcome to my cult where we just hit you with the weird right off the bat and you're either along for the ride or you aren't. This here is a series that I call Scream for Dummies where I welcome any and all Scream-loving nerds to learn more about the franchise. Whether you're brand new like a little baby or you're 4,000 years old, you're welcome to join us this Scream season. My shoulders are a-poppin' today. What I've been doing is taking you guys behind the scenes of Scream and telling you the stories behind each movie. All those juicy secrets come from this book right here. It all began with the Scream. I pull out all the best quotes from this book and kind of walk you through the timeline of the making of the movie. Then we do a special plot breakdown of the movie where I pull out all the most iconic moments to get you up to speed. And I also pull out all the most underrated moments from each movie, and there are no shortage of either in Scream 4. I do all of this so that you guys can finally understand why us Scream nerds say things like your lemon squares taste like ass. And that's all fine and good, but before we dive into it, I need to know, are you ready to fully commit to the bit? Do you want to be a member of the cult of haunted Hippie? In some circles of this community, we're more of a coven, if that's of any interest, but all you have to do to join is click subscribe. That's truly all it takes, but it does also help to click the like and click the notification bell, that way you never miss our next gathering. With that taken care of, it's time to dive back into our history lesson. Last time we left off talking about how Scream completely changed the horror landscape and revitalized the slasher genre. However, critics and audiences were never the most fond of Scream 3, and it was meant to end the franchise. Scream 4 wouldn't come out until 11 years after that last installment, 15 years after the original film. We have to detour a little bit though to set up some context for where everyone is at during this time. The Scream team was all still working in horror, including in 2005 with the movie Cursed. This is infamously one of the messiest horror productions of all time, and it's relevant because I feel like it's kind of indicative of why it took so long to come back for Scream 4. Cursed had a lot of the same onset issues as Scream 3, thanks in large part to the Weinsteins yet again. Who was surprised? Yep, nobody. I find it useful to include all the stories about how awful they were. One, because it's an important lesson for anyone that doesn't understand how twisted the movie industry is, and two, because I think it's a miracle that the Scream movies turned out as fantastic as they are in spite of all of that. So let's get into some of this juicy tea concerning Cursed, because it is the precursor to Scream 4. So most studio films go through test screenings where an audience comes in, they fill out these little test cards, they leave comments. This is in service to see if a film is ready for distribution, if they need to do another round of edits, or God forbid they need to do reshoots. Madalena said that her and Craven's deal with Miramax included a clause for their films that Craven would receive final cut approval on the films if the test scores were high enough. We were always worried that Harvey was paying off the research company and making the numbers lower, but we can't prove it. I would really not be surprised. But they were doing this with Cursed. They would go back to production for a month and a half, halt, do test screenings, the scores kept getting worse and worse. In fact, I featured an interview with Patrick Lussier in my Wes Craven deep dive where he was talking about the fact that he was hired to work on this movie for 6 weeks and ended up on the project for 19 months. They were contractually obligated to make an R-rated film, which they did, and then the studio took it and cut it down, trashed it, turned it into a PG-13 film. When all was said and done, the final product of Cursed had a running time of 97 minutes, including opening and closing credits, and uses just 12 minutes of footage from the first attempt at filming the movie. Like, that is crazy. Imagine how much money was burned because the Weinsteins were like, we do not agree with your vision, we quit. No, wait, actually we don't. Do it again. The experience of filming Cursed was so negative that the normally quiet and mild-mannered Craven hung up a calendar at his house, counting down the days until he wouldn't have to deal with the Weinstein brothers any longer. Like, he hated them. I think it was back in 2021 when I decided to finally go back and rewatch this franchise for the first time since I was a teenager, and I noticed for the first time that these movies were produced by the Weinstein brothers, and I was like, no. But doing this deep dive into the franchise and realizing that literally everybody hated those brothers, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's fine. It reminds me of that meme of Jesus where he's taking all the knives, but Wes Craven and the producers are Jesus, and then the knives are all the Weinstein bullshit, and the kid in bed is us getting to experience the Scream franchise. So 5 years go by after Cursed, and the horror landscape just looks like remakes. Dimension Films had a hand in a lot of them, including Black Christmas, Halloween, Amityville, and a lot of their movies were flopping. They really needed another hit to get back into the game. So they decided to dip back into the Scream well and coincidentally, Wes Craven was in need of another hit too. My Soul to Take was another negative experience for Wes Craven because apparently it was significantly altered from his original vision. Knowing that now, it kind of makes sense why the movie turned out so bad, because it is quite bad. I don't recommend it. But Lucier points out in this book that Wes Craven would have a flop, then a hit, then a flop, then a hit. So Scream 4 was sort of like his natural next step. Also, Lucier explains that the large amounts of money that Weinstein was throwing around helped to soften the blow from their previous fights. But it can never be that simple, can it? It can never just be, oh, this time they threw him a lot of money and then they just left him alone to make the film. Weinstein hadn't changed, and things quickly got off to a rocky start. Along with Williamson, he enlisted Craven and Kruger to write drafts for the film, but he didn't tell any of the men that the others were working on competing scripts. Bob, you sloppy bitch. That's like someone who's cheating right off the bat in a relationship, just like dating 3 different people till the wheels fall off. Because they're going to fall off. What the fuck did he think would happen? As with Scream 3, the filmmakers were plagued with the script constantly being in flux throughout Scream 4's production. In fact, some who worked on the film say the script issues were even worse this time around. Kevin Williamson ended up getting the writing credit, but he was never on set, and Craven contributed a lot to the script. Because Kevin really, after turning in the script, was not involved at all. I know there was like a major rewrite, and Wes kind of just took it all over with some new writers. And this is according to the actor Nico Tortorella. So, like, how much of the movie was Williamson's, I couldn't tell you. But he also had contractual obligations to the Vampire Diaries, so it wasn't like he held any ill will towards the Scream crew. And then Aaron Kruger ended up getting a production credit on the movie. Also at this time, Kevin Williamson had mapped out an entirely new trilogy plan for the franchise, but we are not privy to said plan. I don't know if that's something that Kevin Williamson has ever shared, or if that is sort of the plan they're going with Scream 5 through 7. Luckily, I don't feel like any of those behind the scenes issues bled through into the movie. I feel like the script is really concise and sharp with its commentary. Also, the reveal was hugely ahead of its time, but we'll get there in due time. I think it also helped that during production, the filmmakers also hired an acting coach. The actors could utilize him if they had any issues with receiving the last-minute script revisions. They also made it a point to hire actors that could flip their attitude on a dime to keep up with the script changes. Now let's talk about casting, as we always do, because this movie has a cast to die for. Yet again, people are jumping to be in this movie, to be part of the Scream franchise, and for the first time, it's people that grew up on these movies. And not only the Scream movies, but the scary movies too. Fittingly, Culkin was the one who used the mask to scare his siblings during their formative years. I was Ghostface for Halloween when I was 6, I think 1st grade or 2nd grade. And they may have called David Arquette by his scary movie counterpart's name, Deputy Doofy, while filming Scream 4. I bet that this is even more true of the cast of Scream 5, who are being cast over 20 years after the original, because still at this point, a lot of the actors from this movie were too young to go see the original in theaters, including one Emma Roberts, who is now a staple of this franchise. At this time, her manager made it very known that she did not read. She was an offer-only actress. But because she had never taken on a role like this before, Craven was like, ooh, girl, I'm sorry, but we need to have you read. Sometimes it's ego, but sometimes it's the agent. Even though she normally didn't read, for this project, she read. It sounds like a big ego trip to me, because I'm like, yeah, your aunt is Julia Roberts, but what was your biggest acting credit at this time? Aquamarine? Rory Culkin, our other killer, was also a bit of an elusive hire, much like Skeet Ulrich in the first film. He almost missed out on the part because he just didn't show up to his first audition. There's also an interesting story about him in this book where he met with Bob Weinstein, who was very manipulative towards him. He enticed Culkin into the role by having this personal meeting with him, and then during this grand pitch of his, he took this dramatic pause and looked him in the eyes and was like, and the best part is, you're the killer. And he got all excited about this, and he told his manager, and then his manager was like, oh, did he do like the big pause thing? Yeah, he does that to everybody. The fact that he was the killer, though, was something that he tried really hard to keep to himself. I think they all know that I'm the killer, but I'm not sure. I don't want to get drunk and start talking to these people too much. Man after my own heart, really. I will have exactly one mimosa at a brunch date, and then I'll be like, by the way, did you know I'm pansexual and I don't shave my legs? I would have been on that set like, I know something you don't. Anyway, there are a couple interesting almosts for this movie, like Lake Bell, who was originally cast as Deputy Judy. I'm really glad that she got recast because I think that Marley Shelton is perfect as Judy. One that I'm kind of bummed out by, though, is that Lauren Graham was originally cast as Sydney's aunt. I love Lauren Graham, and I am not familiar with the actress Mary McDonnell that ended up playing her. I've truly seen her in nothing else. But a huge issue with that would have been the fact that she's only 6 years older than Neve Campbell, so wouldn't have really made sense if she stayed in the role. Gabrielle Union also was in talks to star as Sydney's publicist, but of course that went to Allison Brie. She's been circulating a lot on Twitter recently because of a video of her and her husband Dave Franco talking about bussy.
Bushy pussy?
Butt pussy.
Butt pussy.
The bussy, babe.
Now I can't help but think about that when I see her in Scream 4. Nico Tortorella definitely wins for most arduous casting process, probably of this entire franchise. Apparently, Tortorella auditioned 17 times before they finally got the role. And after all of that, they almost lost it. I went on Twitter immediately. I was like, guess what? I'm in the new Scream. Yeah, before there was a press release, and I was almost fired. It reminds me of how Tom Holland literally spoiled Infinity War just on his Instagram Live.
Enjoy, Mark Ruffalo.
That was history right there. Tortorella was also a bit of a troublemaker all around, and apparently they called out Bob Weinstein himself. Weinstein came out to visit set and they had all organized a dinner together, but it was the same day that Nico's girlfriend was flying into town. So naturally they were a little bit late to dinner. I walk into dinner late and I can't remember exactly what Bob said. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, you finally showed up." And I was like, oh yeah, kind of like that script did too. Like, I've always seen myself as an equal in any situation I'm in. I'm not like the type to fucking bow down to whoever the boss is in charge. And everyone loved that I called fucking Bob out. Role model, non-binary icon, anti-authoritarian babe. Like, just because you're employed by someone doesn't make them better than you. What do you think, you're better than me, eh? I don't know if this is a uniquely American thing. It's certainly true of a lot of movie sets, but power structures in workplaces are so fucking toxic if you're in the wrong place. On this shit-ass set that I always bring up, there was this one producer that was clearly on a power trip. He was kind of in charge of us PAs and would have these end-of-day meetings with all of us for literally no reason. We all knew what we were supposed to do. At Picture Wrap, we go around, we clean up everything, we prep as much as we can for the next day, and every day this dude would sit us down and be like, remember, you guys have to go into every bathroom, you need to clean up crafty, I don't want to see any wrappers, no trash on the floor. And it's like, bro, what do you think we were just fucking doing? Can we go home and get some sleep? Because we have to be back here in like 10 hours. Fuck you very much, good night. By the end of that 3-week production, I literally just stopped checking in with him. I was like, there's no way that I'm gonna keep losing a half hour of sleep every night so that you can feel like big man. And you know what? I didn't get fired. Moral of the story, question authority always. I'm here to be a bad influence, baby. When you're on a set, no one should really feel like your boss. Like, you should feel like a collective organism, all just with the same goal of making a film. No one is more important than anyone else. There should be kind of an air of mutual respect. Speaking of, that was very much the on-set dynamic for Scream 4. Ever since the first film, Craven had been open to the actors ad-libbing lines. It was the director himself who came up with one of Kenny's most quoted lines from the film.
Jesus, the camera, hurry!
My name isn't Jesus.
And that's one of my favorite lines. He sort of let you go in your own direction and then we'll just nurture that idea if he approved. The freedom that would allow and the weight it would take off the actor's shoulders, I can only imagine. Knowing that you're not working for someone who's absolutely married to the material is so freeing. I luckily never have. Generally, it's just a matter of respecting and trusting your actors, that they know how the lines feel best, and so if they change it up a little bit, just let them. Roger L. Jackson ad-libbed a lot of his lines in this movie, most notably the one where he tells Sydney he's gonna cut her eyelids in half.
I'm gonna slit your eyelids in half so you don't blink when I stab you in the face.
When Wes called cut, Nev said into the phone, "You sick fucker." That's a very dark yet incredible line that we wouldn't have gotten if Wes Craven was like, no, you need to do it how it says it in the script. They also got back to the partying ways of old with the new cast. Also, they were shooting on location in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and so everyone was put up in a hotel again. Emma Roberts, Nev Campbell, Courtney, and David, they all had their own rental houses, but were still really involved with everyone else. According to Tortorella, everyone would go and hang out at Courtney's place or at Nev's place, or they would go out to the local bars, and that staying at the hotel felt like being back at college and kind of compared it to a fraternity. I don't want to use the word hazing, but it was like there was an initiation process to get into the family. Those are some of the wildest times of my life looking back. In fact, all of this partying led to a little bit of injury that could have gotten the cast in trouble. Luckily, there were never any hotel complaints because they took that debauchery elsewhere. But on one such adventure, Culkin and Knudsen had headed out to Grand Rapids because there was supposedly a party there, when Knudsen developed a really strong pain in his stomach that only kept getting worse. Eventually, it got so bad that the pair thought that they should go to the emergency room. We got pulled over while I was driving there because I was driving a little too fast. The cop just shook his head and was not impressed with the fact that we were in Scream at all. So they thought that they would get some sort of special treatment from this cop because they were shooting a movie. Typical 20-year-old white boy stuff, I guess? I wouldn't know. Anyway, it ended up that he was passing a huge kidney stone and they kept that from production. I guess he was only in the hospital for like a night or the weekend, and so they went back to work like nothing happened. Tortorella also threw their back out the night before shooting shooting the Stab-a-thon scene and didn't tell anyone. I still to this day have never been in more pain in my life on set than I was in that moment. Tortorella said they were worried because they had already been scolded for having too much fun during production. Apparently, they had fallen down in their trailer the night before, probably from being too intoxicated or something, so they just did that scene the whole day in agony because they didn't want to get in trouble. In fact, they go on to talk about how they think that they couldn't have gotten away with all that they did if social media had been around back then. And I'm like, what were you doing? Spill! Well, they did a little bit, actually. We were partying at this house, and somehow in a bathroom, the massive mirror fell off the wall and shattered everywhere. David Arquette also had not changed much between films. David would be obviously the wild card. You never knew what he was up to. I guess sometimes he would throw whole parties at the local bars with his friends from LA. If you recall back in the OG Scream days, he would run around the hotel in just his underwear. There were lots of hijinks on the set of Scream 4. Sometimes the other actors would put on the Ghostface costume and go and scare Emma Roberts in her house at 2 a.m. That's kind of messed up. I think that's taking it just a little bit too far. But everyone formed really close bonds on that set, and they're still friendly to this day, even though they don't really keep in touch. So getting into the reception of Scream 4, it's definitely found its audience now. However, at the time of its release, the film was met with a shrug from audiences. Critics were kinder to the film than its predecessor, but Scream 4 was released at a time when YouTube was just starting to have a chokehold on the world. Like 2011 is the same year that Friday by Rebecca Black was released, if that kind of helps orient you. So it really came out at the perfect time, what with Jill's motive for fame, but at that time it was not something that people would really understand yet. A lot of people still don't, and it's finally found its audience really, I think mostly with my generation, because people who are terminally online, they understand the intent of this movie much better. The film opened with $18 million in its opening weekend, and it was in second place behind the animated bird movie Rio, but it only made $38 million domestically. There's another theory in here from Knudsen about the attitudes of the audience at the time. Because this was a time when a lot of remakes were coming out and Blumhouse was churning stuff out like Paranormal Activity and Saw, and those were already becoming really repetitive, people were sick of horror movies being done a million times, the same thing over and over, and losing the charm of the original. I think maybe a lot of people didn't go to the theater because they thought, oh, here we go, another horror movie that needs to have 10 different versions. I think that's pretty airtight logic. You're immediately going to alienate so many people by tacking a number 4 onto a franchise movie when the last installment came out like 11 years prior. Big reason, I'm sure, why last year's movie is just called Scream. There's another reason too, but we'll get into that next week. So because people were kind of indifferent to this movie, plans for another Williamson trilogy were put on hold. However, in 2015, the franchise was revived yet again with the MTV TV show, which I am considering doing an aggressively neurotic breakdown of. Fans didn't really like that show either. One of their big mistakes was changing up the mask for the show. I like that show, but it only got 2.5 seasons. The third season is only 6 episodes. And that is basically where the story ends, with it all began with a Scream. This came out before Scream 5. And the last chapter is basically just people talking about how much they love Wes Craven. When I went in for the Wes Craven project, I expected this dark little macabre man like most horror auteurs are, and that wasn't the case at all. I consider him one of my life's great teachers. Liev Schreiber had a similar sentiment. He was exactly that. He was like your favorite humanities professor. Patrick Lussier talks about how Wes Craven came to the premiere of My Bloody Valentine and how afterwards he gave a testimonial for the movie when he wasn't even asked. Knudsen says that he was like the grandfather he never had, just the sweetest little man. Rose McGowan also felt a really paternal vibe from him. In our world, the movie world, it was like he was the perfect parent. That was something I hadn't really had either. He used to babysit my dog Bug on the weekend. So wholesome, so wholesome. Roger L. Jackson also has a story. After a day of shooting Scream 4, he came back to the hotel in the wee hours of the morning and it was snowing and freezing cold. And there's Wes with a camera in the middle of the night taking pictures of the night birds because he loved birds. And I thought, God, after all this whole night's work, he's out. Ooh, am I gonna cry? I thought, God, after this whole night's work, he's out doing this. Oh, what's happening right now? You know what? I am about to start my period, so don't blame me. Like, what a guy. He just sounds like this saint of a man. Okay, hold on, let me relax. Oh no, there it goes. Shit. I know you guys won't judge me, so whatever. I'm not gonna go fix my makeup. Scream 4 would also fittingly be the last movie that he ever directed in his life. He privately fought brain cancer until he passed in 2015 and obviously leaves a powerful, powerful legacy in his wake. A legacy that we will continue to talk much more about with Scream 5, but that will conclude our history lesson for today. Which means that it's time for none other than the plot breakdown. So this installment has one of the most unique openings of the entire franchise. I love it, and I'm gonna tell you all the reasons why. First of all, it's Lucy Hale and this other girl talking about Saw 4 and torture porn movies, all the early 2000s trends. Do you have any idea how big this girlie was in the late early thousands and early 2010s? She's Miss Aria Montgomery from Pretty Little Liars. That was a cultural phenomenon, but you really had to be there. The absolute chokehold this show had on preteens in the early 2000s. I can't overstate it. But this is the only Scream opening that opens with a pair of friends, something that I would be interested to see more of in this franchise. I think it's also worth mentioning that Roger L. Jackson had really developed his voice by this point.
Eat me. You hang up on me and I'll cut through your neck until I feel bone.
It's definitely kind of strayed from that earlier sultry tone, and now it just sounds downright diabolical. There's an homage to the original where they jump at the doorbell the way that Casey Becker did in the first movie. It's all about those subtle homages, I'm telling ya. I know we always have to have the guy that goes, "What's your favorite scary movie?" But these are a little more satisfying for me. Then poor Lucy Hale and this other girl get got, and you can very obviously see the neck prosthetic, which is definitely on purpose, because that turns out to be the opening of Stab 6. I love these super subtle touches because it's definitely a commentary on all these franchises that have been stretched to no end. The one that jumps to mind is Friday the 13th, because there are definitely a few prosthetics in that franchise that are very easy to spot. Most notably in the first movie, I mean, Kevin Bacon's neck is an entirely different color than his face when he's getting killed. Anyway, then we get another absolutely iconic cameo, and I so wish these cameos came up in the book, but there's Kristen Bell. They're talking about how the meta shit has been done to death, and it's leading you down this path of, damn, I probably wouldn't get along with this girl. And then in this moment on my first viewing, oof, I was taken out.
You can see everything coming.
Did that surprise you?
Did that surprise you? Oh, that delivery! And then it turns out that's the opening of Stab 7, and finally we're in the real world. Again, I'll reiterate a point that I made in part 3, that I feel like when these movies are really committing to the bit, that's where they start to lose people. Personally, I eat it up and leave no crumbs. I go, nom 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 nom. I think my favorite thing about this opening is how each group of girls deconstructs horror movies in a different way. Stab 6 is commenting on current trends, and then Stab 7 is commenting on current trends. They call that meta bit kind of tired, and it's just Scream poking fun at itself. And then finally we become grounded again when they're making commentary on the original trilogy and how that's based on Sidney Prescott's life. Then we get what was a huge subversion of tropes at the time, with Ghostface calling her the dumb blonde with the big tits. She counters with her GPA and credentials and proves she's basically the antithesis of all the girlies getting murdered in Michael Bay remakes. All of his final girls historically have looked like this. I've coined it the early 2000s final girl outfit, and then these next words come out of Roger L. Jackson's mouth, and it's goosebumps.
People live, people die, and you better start running.
And boy does she run. She also tries to run out the front door but goes up the stairs in an obvious homage. The sequel also brings us back to the really violent roots of the franchise, because when she tumbles down the stairs, you really feel sorry for her. Whereas in Scream 3, I think we're all kind of chuckling a bit whenever Dewey continually tumbles down hills and stairs and whatever. This movie is like, no, we're taking you back to the brutality of it all. We get an homage to Tatum's death as well, because it turns out there are several ways a garage door can be used to harm someone. I mean, this opening it really takes us back. It has all the things. It's got movie in a movie absurdity. It's got subtle homages and the dark, almost sadistic tone of the original. And who doesn't love a good chase scene, right? It's something that a lot of fans complain is sorely missing in Scream 5. Anyway, so we pick back up with Sydney, who looks good. She's clearly been dressed by her publicist and is on tour for her book Out of Darkness. Something that I suppose I'll never make sense of is why this movie looks the way that it does. It's like the world is dipped in gloss, or that the cinematographer had never heard the term exposure before. So overexposed, and for what? Man, you had Wes Craven there, more than 20 features under his belt. Was he not keeping an eye on that? You know, in all fairness, that's probably the reason why he wasn't, because he was like, I'm on Scream 4. Surely they hired a competent cinematographer. No offense though, I'm sorry to whoever you are. I kind of like that it has a more nostalgic feel to the movie. Still just kind of weird though. Then we check in with mom and dad. They have a nice little suburban life. He's just getting up for work and she's still in bed. But moments later, we meet one of the all-time best side characters of this entire franchise.
Hey, before you get in the car, you have to promise not to kill me.
Why?
What did you do?
Notice how she doesn't promise not to kill her. She answers with a question. Kirby is also then talking about Sydney, and she's like, your cousin is the reason why I love horror movies. And I'm sure that all of us watching were like, girl, same. And then it dawns on us that we have not been abandoned. We have not been stripped of our voice. We can now behold our new Randy. I also find it interesting how Jill gets a call from the killer in this scene to throw everyone off the scent. And notice how Charlie never gets a call. It's evident on rewatches that Jill literally never intended to keep him around. She was gonna throw him under the bus from day one. Now we meet Deputy Judy, who in a lot of ways is still not very likable to me, because why does she say this?
You're not cheating on your wife if you eat my lemon square.
It's not an uncommon dynamic. Young women will often view older men in their industry as very desirable. And now Dewey is actually the sheriff, so she's like, yeah, eat my lemon squares. While Dewey has this success, poor Gail has no idea what to write about. She has terrible writer's block. They're setting up the rift between Gail and Dewey that will be much more apparent later on. But this thread was actually already set up in Scream 3, where Gail was like, I told you, I couldn't stay in Woodsboro.
1 year in Woodsboro is like 7 anywhere else.
Anyways, then we meet Charlie, who is sort of technically the real new Randy, but we'll get into that later. Charlie is depicted as much more of a loser, as I think he should be. The way that Randy's pining was framed in the original was like, oh, poor guy, why can't he get the girl? And in this movie, there's much more of a feel of like, okay man, get a grip. I also never noticed that Jill was actively trying to get Kirby to hook up with him, telling her that she could do a lot worse. And they set up more threads of Jill's motive by introducing Trevor, her ex-boyfriend. She's like, when a girl gives you everything and you go and sleep with someone else, that's not losing her. Sort of the old trope of the woman scorned, which I find interesting. The only thing that's a little bit off about that to me is that in the ending, Jill is radiating pure sociopath energy. She doesn't read as someone who cares about anything or anyone but herself. She kills everyone, including her mom. So excuse me if I don't buy that she ever gave a shit about Trevor. Now we're back at Sydney's book signing. We have Sydney and Gail reunite, and I love how in every movie the greetings get warmer and warmer. In Scream 1 and 2, Gail gets slapped, and then in Scream 3 they have kind of like that awkward little hug. In Scream 4 it's obviously a lot warmer, and then even more so in Scream 5. Then we see Dewey's actually taking charge as a sheriff when there's a scare at the book signing, showing some of his character development, and the blood and stuff in Sydney's trunk is roping her back into the mayhem of her life. So Gail is excited. She heads down to the station, all pissed at Dewey because he didn't tell her first, and Judy won't let her into Dewey's office because he's interviewing someone. And I sort of sympathize with her because honestly, Dewey and Judy are just trying to do their job, but god do I love it when Gail reads people.
She wants to be a part of the investigation, Sheriff.
Are you familiar with the phrase, I wrote the book on this?
Now, once Gail is in the room, I'm on her side again. He's treating her like the media, even though in the past she points out she's solved these things 3 times before. Like, he is doing his job, but he's definitely letting it go to his head. Because in Scream 3, the police literally brought her purposefully into the investigation. She's been privileged with that knowledge before. And it's interesting to me to see Gail kind of resort back to her Scream 1 and 2 self, because it seems like Dewey is bringing out the worst in her. Not uncommon with relationships that are starting to fall apart. She had gone through all that development before, but now she's stuck with this partner that doesn't really let her flourish. And suddenly it dawns on me, oh yeah, that's why I hated Dewey. Scream 4 Dewey sucks. We also have some behind the scenes info that I know will be of interest. The couple decided to begin a trial separation right before production on Scream 4 was set to begin. It's something that the other actors said that they were aware of during the production. Arquette said that it came about because Cox had tired of having to act like the parent in the relationship. The couple would go on to finalize their divorce 3 years later. So their on-screen dynamic yet again is mirroring their real-life relationship, but this time it's kind of sad. So let's play one of my favorite lines to lighten the mood.
Your lemon squares taste like ass.
Courtney Cox is the funniest person in these movies, like there's no competition, there's no debate. But then the publicist, Allison Brie, she actually makes me cackle because she says everything that we're probably thinking to Gail. She's saying how it always seemed like an on-screen kind of fling and that they'd never be together in real life. And yet again, Gail reads her, and afterwards she and I are on the same page.
I still got it.
Yes, you do. Always have, always will. Then we get some Billy homages here with Trevor going out the window, and Sydney and I are both like, you remind me of someone. Hands up, honestly, I was sketched out by Trevor at first. I did not see Jill coming. Especially because in the past, most of the killers have been men, and they set her up really well as a final girl. But when you visit the movie again, you find all these little cracks, and that's what makes them so endlessly rewatchable. Now, this part always makes me crack up because Judy is standing in the shadows like such a weirdo. I get that everyone can look weird when everyone is a suspect, but the fact that she's just a red herring makes this so much funnier. She's like, Sydney, we were in the same home room together. We both starred in Peter Pan. man. They're kind of setting her up as this obsessed, almost fan of Sydney. And I'm starting to really like her in this movie because they set her up as this little weirdo for no reason. But then we meet these iconic cops. There's Adam Brody, and he should have had more screen time. I don't know why they cast him to only give him 2 scenes and then have him be killed off. I don't like the other cop though, played by Anthony Anderson, a comedic actor.
It's Olivia Morris. She lives next door.
She can live next door to me.
He's talking about a teenager. Ew. This next scene though is so anxiety inducing. It's one of my favorite sequences of the franchise probably. First of all, Shaun of the Dead is on TV, underrated movie. They get a call from Ghostface who claims to be in Jill's closet, and yet again Jill is in the room when they're getting the call from him. But in one of the best subversions to expectation, he ends up being in Olivia's closet instead, and this line,
I never said I was in your closet.
the stunt work is so brutal too. They said, we're not doing the slapstick shtick anymore. You're really gonna feel these deaths. And for that reason, I can't even really show a lot of these deaths. I could try to show them censored, but there's still a lot. And then Sydney does not hesitate to run into a house with a killer. She is crazy. But then I'm not really worried anymore because she tackles him down a flight of stairs. She's so badass. She kicks him right in the face, like Krav Maga. Sydney goes through the Daphne Blake transformation, I think between Scream 3 and Scream 4.
I'm a black belt now. I've transformed my body into a dangerous weapon.
Daphne is so iconic. After that, Trevor just happens to show up, so they're really leaning into the remake bit. It's just like how Billy happened to show up right after Sydney was attacked the first time in the original film. Then Gail, being the brilliant mind she is, goes and finds the Randys of the new generation. Like, I know that Dewey has matured a lot, and now he's even the sheriff of the whole town, but even he didn't think to do that. And you know what? He never would. But it's also like, hey, buddy, why not? Remember how he literally went to Randy in Scream 2 to ask him who he thought the killer was? Why has he forgotten his vigilante roots? So of course Gail is the one to really figure stuff out in this movie, but anyways, we get another badass moment from Sydney, who fires her assistant because she's like, this is perfect, you can name your price for your next book and you get to be a victim for life. And Sydney's like, girl, did you even read my book?
Sydney, you're fired.
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 This is another example like the one that I pulled from Scream 2, where I feel like Sydney is such a good role model to us all. She's not a sellout. She holds fast to her morals, even in the face of potential extreme wealth. It's an interesting contrast to Gail, who will throw out certain morals, but in the interest of the bigger picture. She's willing to be hated to eventually get to the truth and actually save everyone. Two very different but very strong good guy qualities between the two of them. So then of course, the publicist pays for her transgressions in this scene, and who could ever forget this infamous line?
You are the message.
Fun fact about Roger L. Jackson and his real-life partner for this scene. My wife came with me and was sitting in the room with me while I'm threatening the actress over the phone. I'm threatening to kill somebody and she's doing her knitting. I mean, that's the goal, right? Find a partner who supports you on whatever weird shit you may endeavor upon. But my favorite thing about this scene is that it takes us back to the vibes of Scream 2. Terror in public spaces. Give it to me all day, every day. Help is so readily available if literally anyone walked into that garage or if she could just make it to the elevator. This franchise is so cruel in that way. I love it. Now, time for more Dewey hate because he doesn't treat Gail like legitimate press, and I'd be just as pissed off as her. Especially because 2 seconds later, she's validated by the publicist's body literally falling from the sky. She tells Dewey off as she should, and here comes one of her best lines from this movie. I'm telling you, it's all in the throwaway lines. It's too red. Watch the fucking aliens. Move it, amateurs. Or maybe it's just me. I think I just really have an affinity for them. Now we get the iconic sit-down scene where we go through the new age rules of horror and the rules of remakes. They deconstruct the formula, parents gone, party tonight, setting up the kind of remake vibe of it. But I think my favorite thing about this scene is how the kids react to Sydney being there, because again, like I said, I am of the demographic of these kids in Scream 4.
Beyond Jamie Lee Curtis, forget Linda Blair. I mean, this is the ultimate.
I mean, true. Listen, I love Jamie Lee Curtis, Sally, Jess, all those 70 final girls as much as the next guy. But Gale Weathers too, and Sydney Prescott are just in a whole other league. I think it's partially a generational thing, but also because Sydney and Gale are such better rounded characters. They introduce much more of a feminist element where they survive because they make all the right decisions. I think with Laurie Strode especially, a lot of that is kind of happenstance and luck. And like I said, with Sydney, you know, she also doesn't doesn't sell out for the cash, and she seems to know Krav Maga. Also in Scream 2, where she effectively sets a boundary for herself and she's not guilt-tripped by her boyfriend Derek. And Gail is just fucking real, okay? Listen to her reaction when she realizes she has to go into the belly of the horror nerd beast, the Stab-a-thon.
Where is this circle jerk gonna take place?
And let me tell you, this is probably the only circle jerk I'd ever want to participate in. Look at the vibes. So much of this movie is reminiscent of Scream 2, actually, well, of the entire original trilogy. And not just because this franchise is self-referential, but because of the tone. Like I mentioned, the terror of public spaces, the brutality of the kills, and the comedic relief of Scream 3. Gail puts on the mask to blend in and looks so dorky, oh my god. Courtney Cox is a comedian. She never really took on this role before, it was always David Arquette. You get a little bit of it with her, with Parker Posey in Scream 3, but I don't know, I felt like before this, she was a little bit more self-serious, I think because she was trying to get away from her friend's image, because part of the reason why she auditioned for Gail in the first place was to kind of get away from Monica. But this is the first time where I feel like she's truly acting like a dork, and I'm like, bring it on, I want all of this. Anyway, I love the rules they set up before the Stab-a-thon. I'm gonna use these for any early 2000s movie now. And then there goes Gail being the crucial element to getting these murders solved again, setting up her little cameras. And then she's trying to get dumbass Dewey to come to the barn, and she's like, it would be so meta.
How what can you get?
I don't know, I heard him say it.
Brilliant. That's a little thing that we call comedy. To have two of the architects of meta horror have a conversation where neither of them even know what it means is hilarious. It's reminiscent of how audiences will put labels on creators that the creators don't really understand how or why they got those labels. You see it with David Cronenberg, with Tim Burton, even Wes Craven kind of accidentally became the horror guy. But up next, we have another example of Charlie looking like an absolute loser.
Bravo, well, very well done. I'm very impressed.
Oh, dude. Yeah, she wants it. Yeah.
The assuredness, I have to laugh. It's so funny because he thinks that he is the next Randy when in reality it's Kirby, but it's just absolute incel behavior. Stands for involuntarily celibate, by the way. It just reminds me of the delusional men who have slid into my DMs like, hey, I watch your channel, can I have your number? No. And I don't know if it's because I have repeatedly expressed how sexy Mads Mikkelsen is, but I have some old men in my DMs as well. Oh, the next time you're in London, you should come to the West End. No. I'm getting off track. Okay. Gail literally gets the best chase scenes ever. Again, reminds me of Scream 2. This is horror that's masterfully crafted because we get the foreplay of him creeping up behind her and then the payoff of her being chased and actually stabbed. This time, he's making the movie. This concept was ahead of its time, especially when you consider now that YouTubers like the Backrooms guy and Kyle Edward Ball, they're making movies like Skinamarink, how they got their start on YouTube. Anyways, I don't know if Wes Craven is some kind of witch, a witch who can see into the future. But if you fast forward to like 2015, 2016, and the biggest influences on children are Jake Paul and Tana Mojo, it makes so much sense. I don't know how Craven had the foresight to realize that influencers would be the worst people on the planet, but he did it. So in the next scene, we get more Scream 3 vibes where they're talking about the rules for cops in horror movies. I love this. Bring it back. Maybe we've done all we can concerning cops and how they play into horror movies, but bring in other characters for Scream 6 that do the same thing. What's another profession that you usually see in a horror movie? Like maybe a therapist? I don't know. No, that's not good. Scratch that. I want to hear your ideas. Then he says, I'll be right back. Oops. So then of course we lose Adam Brody and he gets stabbed in the forehead. That is so brutal. Could you survive a stab to the brain for this long? I actually don't know. Here we get into yet another phenomenal death sequence. Sydney's with her aunt and first of all, they see Ghostface in a wind chime. That's cinema right there. But the most memorable bit of this scene is the fact that she gets stabbed through the mail slot. Through the mail slot.
Show-stopping, spectacular, totally unique, completely not ever been done before.
Also, Sydney's crying face is much better. Then Judy shows up and she's actually good at her job, following all proper protocol. But of course, because everyone is a suspect, you're like, she showed up rather quickly. Anyways, are you ready to cry just a little bit?
No more on your own. It's you and me, forever.
Is it though? It's weird to me that they left that in because they were already going through a trial separation at that point. I mean, to be fair, they do still co-parent to this day. I mean, they're friends, so I don't know. Now we're back with the kids. Charlie talks about some charge in between him and Kirby when they exchange trivia knowledge. I'd be turned on too, probably. Because they do have a lot of tension, and then Trevor ruins the moment, and Charlie is pissed. I don't know the last time I saw an on-screen fling where her hair was shorter than his. I like it. And I know that some people will be like, well, what about this? He wasn't just pining because she wanted him to. No, she didn't. Are you gonna tell me you've never been in this kind of a situation where you're drunk and you're just like, yeah, why not? Don't lie to me, we've all settled at some point. Plus, it wasn't until then that they actually connected over horror. But in this scene, we get another underrated and one of my favorite lines from Kirby.
Did I just interrupt something right here? Shut the fuck up.
Who invited you, Trevor?
I love that line so much, I used it in my last Letterboxd review for Scream 4. So circling back to Robbie, he has broken one of Randy's cardinal rules. He's drunk, so obviously he gets got, but not before he says, wait, I'm gay. The actor said that while he doesn't know for sure what Williamson intended, he sees it as Robbie just trying to save himself. I would agree with that. I don't think he was gay, especially because that would have meant that he would have been breaking his own rule about gay people surviving in horror movies. It's reminiscent of Jennifer Jolie screaming, no, I'm the killer in Stab 3 right before she gets killed. Now in this next scene, I don't need to make much commentary on it. This is probably the penultimate Kirby scene. I wouldn't let Charlie in either. Sydney was so right for that, and so then he gets tied up, and Ghostface quizzes her and asks a question about remakes, but before she can even get the question out, Kirby just rattles off all these remakes. It's a commentary on the industry for sure, because for the better part of a decade, all you ever saw was remakes. I have to wonder also if this was Craven or Williamson's attempt to further shit on the Weinsteins for participating in that trend. Also, if I may, Sydney does literally everything right in this movie. She's so smart. She has to be by this point, but still. So then Kirby goes to Charlie and twist reveal, she gets stabbed. We never thought that they would do this to us again. For over a decade, Kirby's attack has been one of the rallying cries among fans. Oh, we wanted her back bad for this franchise. I even made predictions about it last year that I can't remember exactly what they were now, but I predicted she would come back. And her survival actually makes sense, and we'll talk about more Easter eggs of that in Scream 5. But the first time I saw this movie, I was like, oh my god, they did this to us again. They took our voice away again. And the other nerds are either dead or killers. Great. Then we get one of the best reveals of the entire franchise. I don't need to keep going on about this too much, but her motives were entirely ahead of her time. You don't need to go to college. If you start a YouTube channel in like sophomore year of high school, you'll have some bills paid by the time you graduate. Not that I recommend that. I think that everyone who wants to should go to college because it's such a great experience. Just getting out there and experiencing a lot of diverse perspectives is important. But anyways, I will continue on this point that if you saw this movie at the time of its release and you felt like it was underwhelming, zoom out. Take a look around you now and try to contextualize this from today's world. It's amazing that Williamson or Craven really had the pulse on what was going on with kids in today's world, because he was like 70 at the time of making this. Jill is also the best killer since Billy and Stu, if not way more insane.
I am not the girl you cheated on.
Look, Stu had completely lost the plot, but he was not shooting people in their genitalia. Then Charlie becomes even more evident as a loser, like this time Randy gets the girl. Yuck. More of Jill's motive leaks out. She tells Sydney that she's no longer the special one. And then what we've been hinting at along the way finally comes to fruition with Jill killing Charlie because the media loves a sole survivor, baby. Now we have a lot to talk about with Mr. Charlie here. During filming, other actors have become suspicious of him because he was working out with a personal trainer during shooting. He was also doing boxing training with them, and I don't know why, because he never does anything that physical in this movie. For one shot though, he was aggressively clotheslining Neve Campbell and didn't even realize it, and she had to tell him, hey, can you relax a little bit maybe? That's one of those moments laying down in bed at night like, oh god, I can't believe it. Clotheslining Neve Campbell like 4 times hard and didn't notice because we were rolling. Culkin also wanted to add some depth to his character because he didn't want to be just another little follower like Stu. He wanted to play him up as being a little bit regretful, a little remorseful, and so in his mind, he didn't think that he killed Kirby, and that was why he only stabbed her once. And again, at the time that this book was released, we didn't know that Kirby was going to be alive, so his intuition was right. But he also got some very helpful advice from big man Craven. Wes said, when a soldier puts on a uniform, he's not a killer, he's not a murderer, he's a soldier, right? Just put on your uniform and then it's not as big of a deal, do your job. It clicked and that made so much sense and was amazing. That's all I needed was just a few minutes of Wes's time and he would have given it to me at any point. Even Craven's kind of off-the-cuff throwaway advice was monumental for these young actors. I think that's so sweet. But also, the off-screen dynamic of these killers was very weird. Rory had this thing where he was chugging Red Bulls. He would go through 6 to 8 Red Bulls like it was nothing. So he was always just fucking pacing around the house all over the place. Emma always had a book in between. She didn't like to interact with other people in between takes. Always good to go method with some real-life weirdos for your killers, I say. I hate the caffeine craze on sets. I think it's also just because I cannot deal with caffeine. It mimics a lot of the symptoms I get with panic attacks, and so it just just triggers my anxiety. But oh boy, do a lot of people on set exist on nothing but caffeine. Again, that awful set that I worked on, one of my only jobs when Ryan Phillippe was on set was making sure that he always had coffee in his hand. Gotta make sure they're all sufficiently caffeinated. I worked for like a year and a half for this comedy sketch group too, and with them it was all Red Bulls. I just know that all their pee stinks. And also that heart failure may be a looming threat in the horizon. Anyways, back on track. So many tangents today.
Well, sick is the new sane.
She's not wrong. We all have mental illness, and I think as a nation we need to address that, especially because then Jill proceeds to absolutely fuck herself up. She is ripping her hair out, scratching her own face. She starts to overdo it at this point by like throwing herself into tables and stuff. And then the way that she lies next to Sydney is so out of pocket, trying to like mirror exactly how she looks. Jill is the most unhinged scream killer. I really don't want to hear otherwise. Billy and Stu were both willing to be stabbed to cover their tracks, but they had each other to do it. Jill was doing all of this to herself. I have trouble taking antacid pills because they get all chalky when you chew them up in your mouth, and she is throwing herself into glass picture frames. But remember how they talked about the rules of remakes and the false endings and all of that? So in the original, the party was the false ending, and it really ended really intimately at Stu's house. In this movie, the house is the false ending. So Jill comes out, she's surrounded by the media, it's exactly what she wanted, and then while she's talking to Dewey in the hospital, she gives up the information that she has matching wounds with Gail. And I'm like, why would she do that? That bothers me. I wish they figured Jill out in any other way besides that. She was a literal mastermind. She was using and controlling Charlie and then ultimately stabbed him in the back because she was scheming on her own all along. And she tells on herself? I just don't think so. So she hops out of bed, but I'd imagine she'd be so drugged up, but oh well, it's a movie. She finds Sydney to finish her off once and for all and has an amazing line here.
Who are you? Michael fucking Myers?
I love that that trope is flipped on its head. She is the final girl who can't die. Also, because I don't recall there being a classic knife wipe scene in this movie, I'm gonna say her wiping her nose here is the equivalent. So we're in the climax, Jill is about to kill everyone, and I don't know why this line makes me laugh so fucking hard.
Let's go. Get your skinny ass out here.
Get your skinny ass out here. She's just not fucking around, and I respect that. I also don't need to offer much commentary here. It's iconic for obvious reasons. Jill gets shocked in the head. Sydney says don't fuck with the original. Absolute goosebumps moments. That's rightfully on many top 10 lists of dialogue for this franchise. But what's unique about this movie is that it doesn't end on a note of levity. In the original Scream, after the long night is over, yes, the house is swarming with the news and everything, but the sun is coming up. That imagery symbolizes a new day, a fresh start, you know, the end of the night. And same thing with Scream 2, we see her walk out into daylight. In Scream 3, that's the happiest ending for sure, right? With Dewey and Gail getting engaged and Sydney leaves the door open, she's with Mark. In Scream 4, we end with the press talking about how the whole world is going to know Jill's name because she's a hero. It's so cynical and it's dark and it really sticks with me. Especially in this age of misinformation with people being terminally online, it's aged tremendously well. And on that very dark note, that wraps up the plot breakdown. This is one of my favorite Scream films, just behind the original in terms of quality and entertainment value. Hence why this is probably going to be one of the longest Scream videos in my series. There's a lot that I feel the need to defend and there's so much that's iconic about it. I think also besides the original, this is the one that I connect with the most on a nostalgic level. I am of the age demographic in this movie and the commentary is so spot on. There's just too much to love about this movie and I think that if you don't like it, you're wrong. Happy Scream 6 Day, by the way. I know that I didn't get this whole series out before the release of Scream 6, but it's fine because my Scream 6 review isn't going to come out until the second weekend anyways. I hope and I know that you're looking forward to that and also to my reactions to my Scream 6 predictions video. I think that that will be a hoot. And yes, you may have noticed these names scrolling on screen. A huge thank you to my lovely patrons. If you're interested in further supporting me and receiving 4 to 6 bonus videos every single month, you can sign up for that. It's linked down below. My next solo review over there will be of The Harbinger. It's a 2022 release that I feel like no one really talked about, so I'm gonna. But if that's not for you, all the rest of my social media is listed down below, so have fun, enjoy. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in Scream for Dummies Part 5. Bye!